Welcome to the Brian Buffini Show, where we explore the mindsets, motivation, and methodologies of success. Here's your coach, Brian Buffini.
Well, top of the morning to you, and welcome to the Brian Buffini Show. I am so excited for you guys today. As promised last week, I told you about this upcoming episode, and our guest is one of the world's leading experts on controlling the conscious mind, Ethan Kross. He's an award-winning professor in the University of Michigan's Psychology Department, where he founded the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. Just think about that. He's an expert in helping people break the cycle of negative thought. And today we'll be diving into his book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. Ethan, welcome to the Brian Buffini Show. We're delighted to have you.
Delighted to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great stuff. And you and I were talking on offline today when I've been involved in this kind of interested in this content for over 30 years. Talked to you about Shad Helmstetter, a good friend of mine. But I just really feel like this is what Shad Helmstetter did on steroids, and It's phenomenal. So before we get into the content, because people are teed up, last week's episode teed you up, so they're waiting for who shot JR today, you know. But before we get into it, I would love to hear a little bit of, you know, where you're from, what your journey was like. How did you go from being a kid in Michigan all the way up to being in this line of work today? So what was your career path?
I grew up in a working class neighborhood of New York, of Brooklyn, where a bit of a melting pot actually of people from lots of different cultures, including your own. Your accent is a very familiar one that's making me miss home right now. Irish, Italian, Jews, you know, every color, every nationality, all mixed together. Right. But you know, most relevant, my dad was a really interesting guy. He not a college grad, but he was someone who read voraciously and was really into Eastern philosophy and psychology. And he was, you know, bounced around from lots of different jobs over the course of his life. But he read a lot, and he talked to me about what he read. And one of the things he started talking to me about from the time I was 3 years old was the importance of introspection, of when bad things happen, turn your attention inward, try to make sense of the problem, get to the root of it so you can move on, find a solution. And, you know, when I was 3 years old, I had no idea what the hell he was talking about, to be honest. But as I grew older, I really listened to him. And, you know, whenever things happen, I was, you know, should I ask this girl out or not? Or should I apply to this school or that? I'd introspect, and that skill really served me well. It was an asset that I was really thankful to my dad for giving to me. And then I got to college, and I took my first class in psychology. And about halfway through the semester, we got to the topic of introspection. And what I learned is, on the one hand, there were lots of people who benefited from doing this, just as I had, just as my dad told me I would. But there was an equal number of people who really struggled, particularly when they were experiencing strong negative emotions, sadness, anxiety, anger. They would do exactly what my dad told me to do, turn inward, try to figure out why you're feeling the way you are. But their attempts to do that would backfire. It would end up making the problem worse. They'd ruminate, they'd worry, they'd catastrophize, they would get stuck. And that to me was just fantastically interesting. Why is it that we have this amazing, really a superpower to think about our lives and problem solve, but this superpower was really being a huge disadvantage for so many people. And so that led me to graduate school, and it led me to start the Self-Control and Emotion Lab here at Michigan, and that's what I've been researching for the past 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. By the way, my dad, his family were immigrants to America. My dad was born in Brooklyn, then he went back to Ireland. So
nice.
It seems like a lot of good things start in Brooklyn, you know?
Yeah. Well, some bad too, but we won't talk about them.
Yeah, right. You know, as you go through this process, I mean, I just think I'm really loving to roll up our sleeves and get into this because, you know, the introspection piece I feel has been so overdone. You know, I actually have had a chance to speak at national meetings of the psychologists, and when I talked to them individually, it was a lot of times, man, it seemed like they got into the profession to sort out their own junk as much as anything.
Yeah,
And the biggest advice, oftentimes, and not throw everybody in the bus, but just like, see you next week. And it's
yeah.
this, it's like the needle gets stuck, and needle gets stuck. What ultimately led you? I'm curious to write the book, Chatter. What brought you to the point? So, man, this is what I got to write this book.
Yeah, it was actually an experience in the classroom here at Michigan. So I had been teaching a seminar to undergrads on the science of self-control. You could think about this as science's greatest hits when it comes to managing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
being wise in life. And it was a super fun class to teach, really conversational. And the way the class went was every week everyone would do the readings and I'd ask the students questions. We'd have a conversation. And the assignment on the final class was we kind of switched roles. And so the students came to class with questions for me. And you probably know this, Brian, but like after you teach a class, the same class a few times, you come to know what questions you're going to get after a while.
Right.
Like, you just the same questions tend to come up. But the last time I taught this class, this girl named Ariel asked me a question I had never gotten before, and it really stumped me. And the question was, why are we learning about this now? And what she meant by that, I didn't understand initially, was she elaborated, well, we've been learning about all of these tools that we can use to perform better, to feel better, to be healthier. Why didn't someone teach us about this before we were seniors in college? Like in high school or elementary school when we could have used these things. We're done now. And I didn't have a good answer to that question, and that really bothered me. It really bothered me that I couldn't answer that question. And so it led me to do two things. First was get involved in a project where we've taken what we know about the science of how to manage our emotions and our mind, and we've translated that into a curriculum for high school students that we're actually now evaluating. But it also led me to participate in a much bigger effort to share what we know about how to control the mind and our emotions for people more generally. And that's what this book is about.
Well, and Ariel, I got good news for you because the average age of my client in the coaching business is about twice the age of Ariel. And they start with me going, man, where were you when I first started? And so the great news is, right, we're never done. The dynamic is you get a little older, you got more to reflect on, but you got more to learn from. But you've also probably grooved the needle quite a bit in regards to
Yeah.
this self-talk. There was, a lot of times I read a lot of books, and some of them are very heady. You have a great style. I mean, you have the voice and the manner. I wish I'd have taken a class from you in college. It's very you have a very soothing voice. You got a great way of explaining things. But you wrote about this letter you received in 2011 that sparked a whole bunch of research for you on our inner voice. And I'm such a believer in that, in what goes on inside our head, it influences our actions, how it changes the chemical balance in our bodies, all this stuff. Can you share with the audience a little bit about this letter you received and how it sparked all this research?
Yeah, so I guess about 10 years ago at this point, I had appeared on the evening news to talk about a study that my colleagues and I had just published that got a lot of attention. It basically showed that when people use the language of pain to describe how they feel when they're rejected, so my feelings hurt, we basically used brain scanning technology to show that when you experience rejection, it actually activates physical pain centers in the brain. And so I went on the news. It was really exciting. My mother was so happy. She finally told me it was okay that I hadn't become a real doctor, an MD. Yeah, so I was like, I've
sounds
done
like
it.
sounds like a New York mother.
That's right. I love her dearly. I love her dearly.
Yep. Yep.
So it was great. I had a 30-second appearance on TV, and life was good. And fast forward about a week, I showed up at my office at the University of Michigan, and there was a letter hand addressed to me, which was very rare. Even back then, it was all about email. I never got letters. But I opened this up, and the moment I did and saw the contents, I started having a physiological stress reaction. I started sweating profusely. There were ugly drawings and racial slurs and all sorts of threatening messages contained in this letter. And it was the kind of letter I showed it to a few colleagues, and everyone turned white when they saw it. So I had to go to the police station and talk to the police officer, who wasn't particularly reassuring when I explained the situation. He said, "Yeah, it's probably nothing. Just try to drive home a different way from work each day to be sure."
Yep.
And the punchline there is, at the time where we lived, I was about 4 blocks from my office. So, there weren't a whole lot of directions I could take home. And so for the next couple of days, I mean, I was in my head, lost in thought, silently talking to myself, which we often do when we struggle with problems. We try to work through them, and my inner monologue was all about what have I done? I've got a beautiful baby. I had my first kid just a few months earlier, and wife at home. I put them at risk. Can I get a new job? I mean, I was really spinning, totally stuck, and really pacing my house with a baseball bat for several nights, really, truly concerned about what could happen. And fortunately, I shifted how I was talking to myself at one point, which really broke me out of that spell. I did something that at the time seemed really odd, but that we've since gone on to do some science around. I did something called distant self-talk. At one moment, when I was having these wacky thoughts, like, can I get a bodyguard? I assure you, Brian, there are no bodyguard outfits that specialize in protecting academics, right? But this is what I'm thinking about. At one point, I said to myself, Ethan, what are you doing? And what I did there was really, and then I went on to, basically, it was like I was having a conversation with a friend, trying to coach a friend through the situation. You need to calm down. This is going to be okay. Go to sleep. And what I did is something called distant self-talk. I basically started coaching myself through the problem like I would give advice to someone else. And we now know that that's a useful tool for managing chatter, the thought loops that we often succumb to. It's much easier for people to give advice to others than it is to take our own advice.
Right.
And what we've learned is that language can be our friend. We can actually use the word. Like, when do we use names? We use names when we think about other people, right? So if you use your own name to talk to yourself, it's almost like a psychological jujitsu technique. It switches how you relate to the self. It's getting you to relate to yourself like you're advising your best friend. And that was really helpful to me. And we've done lots of research showing that it's helpful to others too. So that's my stalker story.
Yeah, and you know what? It's my mother used to say, God builds the back for the burden. You get something like that, it shakes up the system. And every policeman in the world has the same reaction, by the way, for all of us who've been in that spot. And then they tell you the reassuring words, we can't do anything until they do something. Well, thank you. Thank you.
I heard that one too. So it sounds like you can commiserate about this experience.
So the dynamic is ultimately, you go through this. And here, I think there's a point here that's very important. It is perfectly understandable that you went into that funk. It's perfectly understandable. There would be probably something wrong with you if you didn't have that. Oh no, you're supposed to be this, specialist in the University of Michigan. You're not. You're supposed to read a letter that threatens your life in very terrible ways and just say, "Well, that is just unfortunate. That person must have a lot of issues." I think this is a big deal. Is to have empathy for yourself. Like, of course you would have a reaction like that. Of course and it's okay. And if somebody today is plagued with negative self-talk, and so on and so forth, a lot of it is in reaction to things that have been said or done or witnessed. And then sometimes, unfortunately, we proceed to build upon it and build a huge second and third story or cement it in place. So I think the first thing is, that was the natural thing. I think this distant self-talk, what a magnificent, simple, understandable. Because as you know, people are great at insight for other people and terrible at insight for themselves. So having that conversation with yourself, calling yourself by name, and actually giving yourself a consultation, phenomenal experience. You mentioned it earlier, these attempts to go inside and reflect on our problems, they often backfire. Why is that? Why does it backfire when we do this to ourselves?
So it typically backfires. Well, actually, before I answer that question, let me
Yeah.
back up 1 second. I want to make clear to everyone that talking to ourselves, our inner voice, this is an amazing tool that
Mm.
under most circumstances helps us a lot. This is the basis of our ability to problem solve, to innovate, to create, right? Like, before I think about a presentation I have to give, I'm rehearsing what I'm going to say in my head, right? I'm imagining what the
Yep.
obnoxious person in the audience is going to ask me. And then I imagine I hear what I'm going to say back to that person, which, by the way, is usually something very aggressive I would never say in real life. But in my head, I could do it, and it's fun.
Yeah. All right.
So that's we use this inner voice all the time,
Yeah.
and it's powerful. So when does it backfire? It tends to backfire when we experience intense, strong negative emotions, which are part and parcel of daily life, I think, for many of us.
Yeah.
And what happens when it backfires is we zoom in so tightly on the problem, we get stuck, we fixate on it very narrowly. So I'm just thinking about that letter. I'm seeing the letter. I'm imagining what's going to happen if that person comes. And what happens when we zoom in that narrowly, we lose perspective. So we can't see the bigger picture, which is often so amazingly helpful for working through our problems. And so, give you a concrete example that many listeners might relate to. Like right now, look, many of us, I think, are worrying and ruminating about the pandemic, about our own health, the health of our loved ones, the fact that we're dealing with our kids at home. There's lots of sources of stress right now. And a lot of us are so tunnel visioned into that stress. That's all we're thinking about. And we can't get out of it. And so when that happens, one set of tools that can be really useful is shift your perspective, try to go broad. And there are lots of ways you could do that. Distant self-talk is one. Another tool I talk about in the book is something called temporal distancing. Fancy name, we could call that mental time travel. You think about, rather than getting stuck in, oh my God, how awful is the situation right now, think about how you're going to feel 6 months from now, when you're maybe sitting on the beach with 2 or 3 pina coladas and having a good time because you're vaccinated, right? Maybe it's not 6 months, maybe it's 9 months, but doing that, transporting yourself into the future, what that does is it makes it clear that as awful as what we're experiencing is right now, it's temporary. It's going to end. And that gives us hope. And hope is really powerful for changing the.
It's funny you say that. I had the great privilege of interviewing a commander of the Navy SEALs, and they were in this firefight. And one of these brave soldiers who'd been on deployment after deployment and done heroic act after heroic act kind of snapped. And it just kind of was all getting the best of him. And these guys they're not they're not superhuman. They're regular human beings who have some very special qualities. And this one guy was kind of panicking, and the commander just kind of got him by the shoulders. And for a second, while bombs and bullets are firing, goes, "I want you to think of yourself 6 months from now. You're back in San Diego. You're in the beach, and we're all hanging out. We're drinking a Corona, and you're telling your buddies how you, at a moment when you've had the crisis, what happened and what did you do. Imagine what you'd say." He went on to say later on, that guy not only gathered himself, and was able to use his mind to solve a problem, which ended up saving a bunch of guys' lives. And so, bombs and bullets flying, he did the temporal distancing, right? The mental time travel, took him to a beach in San Diego drinking a beer, and all of a sudden he wasn't in combat in Iraq. He took him away from that. And the guy was able to use his mind to solve a problem which saves lives. So if it can work under that duress, it can work anytime.
And it's funny how when we travel in time, it often is to a beach with a delicious cocktail, huh? um, but Brian, one of the things that was been so interesting in doing research on this the past 20 years and writing about this work is there are so many different tools that we can use that are like this. These are small shifts in how we think that recalibrate us as when we're struggling. And sometimes it's just a gentle nudge to think differently that can make a difference. And
Right.
we often stumble on these tools without knowing it. Like, so, Distant self-talk. People have been doing this for ages, but they don't know why they do it. And I
Yeah.
think the value of the science is it shines a spotlight on these tools, so we can be really deliberate in how we use them when we're spiraling and experiencing chatter.
So the book is fabulous because you've assembled some tried and true practices, things old and new, and aligned them all. I think this is kind of the elephant under the carpet in how much uh, all of us deal with our own internal life, our own internal monologues, what we have to deal with. And I get the question all the time, Brian, why are you always so positive? Why are you always so up? And the answer is I'm not, but I do have a few tools to get me through the day, to keep me moving on, and to keep achieving at a high level. So I'm delighted you put this book together because so many, not only do you explain these in wonderful terms, but you've aligned so many of these how-tos and tips in very understandable ways that we can use. So it's fantastic stuff. Let me kind of dive in here for a second. You point out again this dynamic in your book about the power and peril of other people. So what is this, and what can we learn from the power and peril of other people?
I think this is a really important point in the book. We said before that we can often give advice to others better than we can follow that advice ourselves. So other people are in a prime position to help us work through our chatter. Uh, and if you look at the research, what you find is, indeed, certain ways of talking to other people can be remarkably helpful in helping us through our struggles. But if you talk to the wrong people the wrong way, they can actually make our problems worse. And this point is often lost. If you look right now at the advice that many public health organizations like the CDC are giving to folks who are struggling with the pandemic, go find other people to talk to. It is not that simple. And here's why. Oftentimes when we go to other people, we think that just venting our emotions, unloading what we're feeling, is the way to feel better. This is a very, very popular belief. What the research shows is that if let's say you and I, well, I hope we're now buddies, and
Yep.
let's say I call you up to talk to you about something that's really bothering me, I'm spinning over. If I just unload to you what I felt, and you just keep on egging me on by asking me more about what happened, that makes me feel really close and connected to you. I know you're there for me. You're empathizing with me, and that feels good in the moment. But what happens when I leave that conversation if that's all we do? I still have the problem. And
Yeah.
if anything, the problem's even more activated in my head because we just kept talking about it. So I continue to ruminate. And so there's actually research which shows that if you just vent, you feel closer to the other person, but it actually keeps your problems alive. The best kinds of conversations do two things. First, you do share what you're feeling with the person you're talking to a little bit. The other person needs to learn about what you're going through, right? And a little bit of empathy is a good thing. But at a certain point in the conversation, they nudge you to do what, you just described happened to that Navy SEAL. They nudge you to think a little bit differently about it. All right, so if you come to me, Brian, I hear about the really bad guest you had on the show was driving you nuts. Brian, but you have so many guests, so many interviews have gone so well for you. So can't you put it in perspective? Or maybe I say, well, let me tell you about how I've dealt with that kind of situation.
Right.
So you're doing two things. You're validating the other person's feelings, but helping them also reframe it.
Right.
And that's not what a lot of people do.
Right. Well, the other dynamic, which what I thought when I was reading the book, is it also because we all have these experiences. Everyone can relate to what you're talking about. This is all in real life. So number one, you're taking the needle on that vinyl record and you're scratching it deep. So now it's a problem. Now it's a power problem. But the other dynamic is you've just taken that relationship and cemented it around this negativity. And either A, this person, if they're really into that negativity, you got a problem friend, or B, you've taken a good friend, and now when you get together, you feel the need to go back to that same dynamic. For example, I have one of my best friendships in my life was formed through another person. So I was friend of this person. They were a friend of that person. We became friends. Well, this person, as sometimes happens in life, spirals out of control, became a complete train wreck. Well, for a while, every time we got together, we felt the need to talk about this person who'd introduced us, because that's how we knew each other. And finally, I go, time out. Would it be okay if when you and I get together, we don't talk about that at all? And we ended up forming a great friendship that's lasted 30 years because we no longer addressed that thing that brought us together. And even if it's you vent and somebody's empathic, if you go back to that well, now that relationship is becoming cemented around that negativity. And if they're a good pal, you've kind of ruined them, or you will ruin them. And if they're not, it means they just love the drama, and they want more of the drama, but you still go away with your problem, like you say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's very true. And so I talk to a lot of people about this, and one reaction people have is, but it feels really good to vent.
Sure.
And yeah, it does feel good, and the research shows you feel connected to the other people. But what I encourage people to think about is, there are lots of things we do that feel good in the moment that aren't good for us long term. Yeah. Lots of things, right? And I think it's important to keep that in mind. So what's the take home here? There are two. There's a lesson here about when you're struggling with chatter, to be very deliberate about who you seek out support from. So I'm exceptionally deliberate about who I talk to about my problems, right? And by chatter and problems, we're talking about like everyday problems that you get stuck on, not necessarily, clinical ones. There are many people that I love very much and who love me, I think. I don't talk to them about my chatter because I know they're just going to kind of light me up. Instead, there are like 3 people I go to for personal issues and 4 for professional. I've got like a chatter advisory board that I consult, right? And they're
very good.
They're really, really helpful.
Yep.
And then the other take home is, there's a lesson here for all of us and how we can react to our friends and colleagues when they approach us for help, right?
Yep.
Don't just get them to tell us over and over how bad they felt. Try to help them reframe when they're ready the problem. Right. So we can be better chatter advisors to others.
Well, one example, one of the things we do here at Buffini Company, we years ago we acquired a company that does in-depth analysis of a people's natural gifts and abilities, and one is how they communicate. And so I'm a very synergistic person. So synergistic persons want to talk things out. What I had to learn is I can only talk out certain things with certain people.
Absolutely.
And so it's great to hear, like, you're very deliberate. That's a great concept because, and especially these types of things, I think, like you say, there are certain things you can share with some people that you shouldn't share with others. And and be aware of what it does to you, but also be aware of what it does to them and the relationship that you have. So I think that's phenomenal advice.
Let me just build on that for a second more. Everything I just talked about deals with when you specifically approach someone else for help. You ask for advice. Yeah. There are situations, though, and this touches on what you just described about you being synergistic and liking to talk. Some people don't like to talk about their problems. Right. And sometimes we see our friends and loved ones struggling and they don't ask us for help. And there's something else you could do in those situations, which I talk about in the book, which is you try to help them invisibly. It's called invisible support. So here's an example of that. So my daughter is maybe struggling with her homework, and I see it. Look, I'm a professional, right? I'm a professor. I can help with fifth grade math. Hey, sweetie, let me show you how to do that. Instantly, the fists on the. Did I ask you for help? Do you think I don't know how to do it? And then I feel like crap, and the fighting begins, and not good, right? I've essentially threatened her sense of self-worth and so forth. Not good. So in those situations, though, there are other things that we can do to help people. So let's say my wife is really stressed out at work, and I know she could use some help, but she doesn't ask me for it. I can help her indirectly, right? I can do things as trivial as, pick up the dry cleaning or take care of dinner. Do things to make it easier for her to work through the problems she's struggling with. Or if I know she's really struggling with a client at work, she's a nutritionist, maybe I indirectly give her some advice about how to help. Like, hey, have you seen this interesting talk? It looks really relevant to a lot of the stuff we do, right? So don't shine a spotlight on oh, I know you're struggling. Let me tell you what to do, but
Yeah.
give her the information some other way. Research shows that that can be really helpful. Those invisible ways of helping can be useful for relationships.
Well, my wife figured this out. I'm married 30 years, and my wife figured this out a long time ago with me, which is she'll buy a book on the subject matter that she's gone through. She's highlighted a bunch of things, and then she'll write a little note. This is my take on this. What's yours?
That is exact. She is
It's,
an
yes.
exceptional invisible supporter.
She's a genius. And
You're a
and
lucky man.
well, and because she's highlighted it, I know she's engaged in it. And she does it in a way like, "Hey, I just want your thoughts on this." Now I'm well trained at this stage where I know, okay, I must be really screwing up here. But I will say this: it makes for great conversation, and it's one on one together makes 11, and so there's nothing as powerful as let's do this together, or even with this, like we have a team of coaches in the building next door that are people. They transform people's businesses and lives. Well, one of the dynamics we often get into in coaching is a coach will say to someone when they're kind of stuck, let me ask you, if I had this problem, what advice would you give me? Let's say I'm here, and what advice would you give? And it's amazing. 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll write it down. They'll feed it back to them. And then the end of the coaching session be like, so I should just do that then, huh? Yeah, it is. And we all need it. We're all stuck. And I think another piece here is it's not that there's something wrong with you. Like some people think when they have the voices in their head, like when that's often referred to in old movies
Yeah.
as you got some mental problems.
Yeah, absolutely not. Couldn't be
Yeah,
further from the
right.
truth. We all have a voice in our head, and if
Yeah.
you are questioning that, here's a little exercise we could do right now. Let's say my phone number was 209-0501. I want you to repeat that number in your head silently. Just say the digits. If you've just done that, you've exercised the voice in your head,
Mm.
right? You've used what the voice in our head means. Let's strip away all the Hollywood connotations about,
Yeah.
delusions, and I know exactly what you're. This is our ability to silently use language,
Mm.
right? Silent inner speech, and it's a basic feature of the human mind. So if that morphs into chatter at times, you're in very good company. Because, for the book, I interviewed everyone from elite athletes to CEOs to everyday, Joe Schmoes walking down the street. And I mean Joe Schmo with enormous affection. I
Sure.
consider myself one of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And what was striking to me was just how common chatter, rumination, worry actually is. We all experience it at times. So it's not something to be, ashamed of at all.
My mom used to say it this way, and all my great lines come from my mother. She used to say, "Everything God made for good, we know how to screw up." I mean, you think food, sex, health, everything in life that's made for good, we know how to screw it up. And so I do think this. Maybe we can switch here a little bit because I was fascinated by this Nadal principle,
Yeah.
and I just think it's kind of crucial. This whole dynamic of our perceptions of control play in our lives. I just think that was such a cool deal. You just mentioned the sports piece. I
Yeah.
just love to go there because I thought it was very rich.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Let's just start with the good news, right? We've already established that we can all experience chatter times. The good news is we have evolved to have a toolbox of skills that we can use to rein the chatter in. Some of those tools are things we can do on our own. We talked a little bit about that, distant self-talk, temporal distancing. Then there are tools that are in our relationships with other people. We just talked a little bit about that too. Then, and I think this is a mind blower, there are tools in our physical environments, ways of navigating our spaces that can change the way we talk to ourselves for the better. And so Rafael Nadal is a great example of this. So in an interview, he tells a journalist that the hardest thing he struggles to do on the tennis court is battle the voices inside his head. To me, that's amazing. This is one of the greatest tennis players of all time. He's facing the other great tennis players. Yeah. The hardest thing for him is not returning a backhand or maintaining his endurance during a match. It's battling the conversations inside his head. That little voice that's saying, you're going to screw up. What if you
Yeah.
don't do this? And so forth and so on. So what does he do to manage this? He engages in these rituals where he orders his behavior in very precise ways. If you ever watch Nadal play,
Oh,
you'll see this,
yeah.
right? Before
Oh.
every, it's
Drives
comical.
my wife nuts, by the way.
Yes, yes, many people.
Touches
So,
his hair, then pulls his underwear. I mean,
so
it's a science.
it's a science.
Yeah.
Before every return, as you're describing, he tucks his hair behind his ear. He pulls his underwear out of his butt. He scratches himself. He bounces, and it's very ordered.
Yeah.
And what he says when he's asked, "Why do you do this?" I order my surroundings to provide me with the order that I seek in my head. And it's actually a very powerful observation. And what we know, and this is based on lots of science, is that when we're experiencing chatter, when our thoughts are running wild, right, when we're getting stuck, they're not ordered. We don't have control. And what we've learned is that people can compensate for that experience by establishing order and control in another domain around them. So this is why many perfectly healthy, well-functioning individuals, when they're stressed out, they do things like organize their spaces. Brian, if you saw the rest of my office right now, I'm not particularly stressed right now. I'm pretty happy. If you saw my office, it's a disaster. Okay, I've got books all over the place and papers and the mad scientist doing his thing. When I was writing my book, during moments when I was really stressed out, I did something very unusual for me. I'd go to the kitchen and I'd wash all of the dishes. I'd neatly put them away. I'd scrub down the island. And that was a natural way that I was trying to manage chatter by organizing my environment. It got to the point where I began to worry that my wife wanted me to continue experiencing chatter because she was so happy about how the kitchen looked.
Yeah.
So, but this is to me so fascinating, right?
Yep.
There are things we can do in the world around us that influence the things happening between our ears.
Well, my wife is going to listen to this episode and she is going to die laughing because she can predict when I'm going to write a best-selling book or a brand new training program or when something's happening. And again, this is how it works. And this is why I like Nadal, because I know I have that same kind of OCD where I'll go through and I'll organize. You know those drawers in your house where everything gets dumped? Those
Yes.
get done. Everything. My office gets put away. And I have to have this environment that is everything's ordered so that my mind can flow in creativity.
That's
And
exactly the phenomenon.
and I've been like this. And so when I'm really in a creative mode, prior to it, you'll see, like if you come to my office, it is like OCD heaven. Like this thing is, because I have to create a lot of content. And before I'll create content, I'll order everything. And that
Yeah.
allows me to flow. So it's kind of wild. And that's why I think one of the things that I think when the people read your book, and I know that a boatload of people are going to get this book from this podcast because we have a very, very proactive audience who, when I endorse something, they go for it. And this right here, like I said, I've been interested in this content for 30 years. I just feel like this is the 2021 version, and it's very, very sound. It embraces the past, but it's also very forward-looking. I think one of the most powerful things in the world is go, oh, I'm not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and who actually sits down and talks about their inner secret thought life? Most of us, because
Yeah.
we have all kinds of stuff, good and bad, in there, it's something no one really talks about. And so when you find out that, and one of the, if I was describing this to someone the other day, I said, Ethan takes our inner voice and encourages you how to make it an asset instead of a liability. That's how I'm an old accountant and everything is economics with me, to some
That's
degree, very
exactly
pragmatic.
right. That is exactly right. It is a tool that can be harnessed, and science can show us how to do it. And that's what's so exciting.
Right. Give us a few more of these tools that the listeners can implement just as we finish up here, because we talk about mindsets, the motivation, and then methodologies of success. So you've talked about the distant self-talk. We've talked about the mental time travel. What other one or two other tips you could give that really help with the chatter?
Let's talk about some more environmental tools because I think they're
Okay.
not obvious. And I should say, in the book I talk about like 26 different tools,
Yes, yes. We
and
don't need them
one
all.
we don't need them all. And one thing I want to tell readers, in case not readers, listeners, the readers will know if they read.
Yeah.
One thing that's really important is I don't think of any of these individual tools as magic pills on their own,
Mm,
right? I think that the secret to managing our self talk well is using combinations of tools. And so I
mm-hmm.
think of our tools, we've got a toolbox of skills, and different combinations work for different people in different situations. And so
Yeah.
I think there's a real challenge for listeners to figure out what is the cocktail,
Right.
not the alcoholic one, but the
Yeah.
strategy cocktail
Right.
that really works for you. So what other strategies can fit in? Um, let's talk about awe, the emotion of awe.
Mm,
Awe is an emotion we experience when we're in the presence of something
yep.
vast that we have trouble explaining. So I felt it last week when I watched the Mars rover land.
Yeah.
Brian, I just finally got over experiencing awe at how we figured out to fly planes, right?
Right.
Like for a
Yep.
long time, I had trouble understanding
Yeah.
how we go up in a tin can and
Yeah.
land safely. Now I've got to try to figure out how we manage to take an SUV,
Yep.
launch it out of Earth, and land it safely on Mars. Like it
Yeah.
fills me with that
300
emotion.
million miles. Yep.
Unbelievable. So what do we know? Research shows that when we experience awe, it's a really powerful perspective shift, powerful perspective broadener, because when we're contemplating something vast and indescribable, our own concerns and we feel a whole lot smaller by comparison. Like here I am worried about who's going to get on, the exercise bike first, my wife or I.
Right.
And on the other hand, I'm thinking about interplanetary travel. Like our own concerns feel smaller,
Yeah.
and that helps with chatter. And so that's another take home, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're struggling, try to experience awe. Like go for a
Right.
walk in the park and look at something
Nature.
marvelous from
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
Watch a video of your kids doing something momentous, like walk their first steps. Look at a great piece of art.
Yeah.
Another way of using the environment to help us.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm 35 years here in San Diego, and every night I take the coast road and I pass by 4 beaches. And when I get to the 4th beach, I stop and I get out, and I every day I'm there. I'm 35 years living in San Diego, uh, and I see the Pacific Ocean, and it's the Pacific, the word for Spanish for peaceful, and I stand there and I just hear the waves rolling in, and it's how I finish my day, and it is stunning, and it's stunning every day, and it just brings me to a sense of okay. Sometimes I get pretty worked up, as you can tell. I'm an excited Irishman with an Italian heritage. It's like nitro and glycerin in the same body, right? You can shake it up, and I go there and I get in the presence of what brings me awe, and
Yeah.
it has this fabulous effect, and it settles me down. And I got to say this: we talked about 3 tools today. There's 26 in the book. It's fabulous. I haven't enjoyed reading a book like this in a long time. Some of it was extremely confirming. Some of it was very new and provocative, and some of it was wow. You know what? There's still work to be done here, and it's also been uh, provocative and thought provoking, and then it's also given me a few things that I have a few little gaps in my inner dialogue that a few new techniques to work on. And so we covered 3 wonderful tools today. There's 26 in the book. It's fantastic. Congratulations to you. I think this is super helpful for people, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted to reach out to you and have you on the show. I just think it's great stuff. I want to ask you the 5 questions we ask every guest that all of our audiences come to know, and just gives us a little different flavor on who Ethan Kross is, and it adds more value even to the content. So, first one, what's the single best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
This too shall pass.
Ah, beautiful. Who gave you that?
I think that might have been my mom.
Yeah, well, it not only was my mom, it was my wife, so I got it from both. So there you
Ah,
go. And in fact, it's funny. but the highest rated episode of our entire show we've ever done was an episode at the height of the pandemic entitled "This Too Shall Pass." So
Excellent.
that's a phrase that resonates with people. Okay, what one talent or gift do you wish you possessed that you currently don't?
That's a good one. Talent I possess. Boy, the fact that I'm delaying, people are going to think I'm a raging narcissist here. There's so many. I wish I could be punctual for everything. I'm really good when it comes to business, but not personal.
Okay, great. There it is. What book has been most instrumental in your life?
Easy one. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yep. Fantastic. And his son, by the way, still carries on the work down in Arizona. Fantastic stuff, and definitely a life-changing book for me too. What movie do you watch over and over again? You're flicking through the channels, it comes on again, you always kind of stop and check it out, even if it's a bit of it. What's the one movie you've watched many times?
The Matrix.
That's great. I've gotten that a few times, actually. Yeah, that's great. Good for you. Last one. What is something that's still on your bucket list?
Still on my bucket list. Still on my bucket list. Really making a difference, helping people on a grand scale. I hope the book will do that, but it just came out, so I don't know. So that's
it will. Yeah, it will, and the content travels, and sometimes it travels in ways you can't imagine, and it'll come back around. And when you put it out there, the good stuff has a very interesting way of traveling. So my encouragement to you, I've been at this game a long time, hold your hands open. You may be very surprised. My good friend John Gordon wrote a book called The Energy Bus, and it's a wonderful book, and it's all about how, positive energy and so on and so forth in companies and organizations. That book went nowhere, and then after a couple of years, next thing you know, it got picked up in Korea, and it became this huge bestseller in Korea. Came back around, and he built an entire business. He's written 10 best-selling books since then. He built a training company around it. So be prepared. And I can give you many examples of this. Be prepared to keep your hands open. You'll never know where this will find its way. This is the kind of book that's going to find its way into influential people's hands, and it's going to come back around in very many different ways. So I will tell you something that's on my bucket list is I bought tickets for 2020 because I thought it might be the last time to see Rafael Nadal play Roger Federer, and I've never seen them play, and I had 8 center court tickets for 2 days at Wimbledon. It got canceled, so I'm hoping I still get to do that, and I can watch the Nadal principle in action right there.
Send me a little video clip if you do go. I would love to see it live, and I hope you get to see it. And Brian, let me just say, it was a fantastic interview. Really, a true joy to chat with you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's great work. You have a great style and manner. This is going to help a lot of people, and it's helped me today. And I told folks last week about how to get out of a funk, and I promised them this book would be one of the ways to do that. So thanks for being with us. A person who's helped me with the voice inside my head my whole life is my mother, Therese Buffini. She's 90 years of age. From the day I was born, she told me, "You can do it, Briney. You can do it." And I believed her. And a little Irish immigrant who came to America, got in a motorcycle accident, and was dead broke, always had this inner chatter that said, "You can do it, Briney." And so as we finish up here today, I will finish this episode the way I have the last 270 episodes, with a little Irish blessing, and brought to you today by my mother, Therese. So take it away, ma'am.
May the road rise up to meet you, and may the wind always be at your back. May the rain fall soft upon your fields, and the sun shine warm upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. See you next time.